Before we dive into one of the most incredible stories of human defiance and triumph you'll ever hear, I need you to do me a huge favor. Smash that like button right now, because what you're about to witness is the ultimate reversal of power that will leave you cheering for humanity. And drop a comment telling me what you think you'd do if aliens tried to control your planet. Trust me, by the end of this story, you'll have a whole new appreciation for human ingenuity and our refusal to bow down to anyone. The crystalline spires of the Hegemony Administrative Complex pierced the gray morning sky above what had once been Geneva, Switzerland. Their surfaces pulsed with an eerie blue light that seemed to seep into every corner of the city. Below, washing over the orderly lines of humans making their way to their assigned workstations, Commander Elena Vasquez stood in Q7 Alpha, her weathered hands clasped behind her back in the regulation waiting position. To any casual observer, or more importantly, to the hovering sensor drones that monitored every human movement, she appeared to be just another compliant worker reporting for her daily assignment in the waste reclamation facility. But behind her carefully neutral expression, Elena's mind burned with a fury that 3 years of occupation had only intensified. 3 years. 3 years since the day the Hegemony fleet had materialized in Earth's skies, like a constellation of death, their ships blotting out the sun over every major city on the planet. 3 years since humanity's greatest military forces had been swept aside like children's toys. 3 years since the surrender that wasn't really a surrender, because you can't surrender when your enemy doesn't even consider you worthy of negotiation. Worker 7 Alpha 477, the synthesized voice of the processing terminal called out, its tone carrying the cold efficiency that characterized everything about the Hegemony. Report for assignment. Elena stepped forward, placing her palm on the bioscanner that would verify her identity and check her compliance levels. The device hummed for a moment, and she held her breath. If her shielding had failed, if the neural dampeners Dr. Chen had developed weren't working, assignment confirmed. Proceed to Section Seat 12 for waste processing duties. Relief flooded through her. Though she kept her expression carefully blank, the dampeners were still working, still hiding the fact that she was one of the 0.3% of humans who had proven mysteriously immune to the Hegemony's neural compliance fields. As she walked through the sterile corridors toward her assignment, Elena's eyes automatically cataloged everything she saw. Guard positions, patrol patterns, the locations of sensor nodes, all information that would be invaluable to the growing resistance network that the Hegemony didn't even know existed. The aliens had made a crucial error in their assessment of humanity. They had classified humans as simple bipeds with limited cognitive capacity, beings capable of following orders but lacking the intelligence for complex planning or coordinated resistance. It was an understandable mistake, given that 99.7% of the human population appeared to accept their new circumstances with blank-eyed compliance. What the Hegemony didn't understand was that this compliance was artificial, the result of neural manipulation fields that broadcast directly into human brain patterns. And what they definitely didn't understand was that some humans were immune to these fields, and that those immune humans were very, very angry. Elena passed through Section B9, where she caught sight of Dr. James Chen working at a recycling station, his movements mechanical and precise. To anyone watching, he appeared to be another perfectly compliant worker, but Elena knew better. Chen was the brilliant xenobiologist who had figured out how the compliance fields worked, and more importantly, how they could be countered. Their eyes met for just a fraction of a second, and Chen gave an almost imperceptible nod. The message was clear. The meeting was still on for tonight. As Elena continued to her assignment, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this point. The first months after the invasion had been the darkest period in human history. Governments had collapsed overnight, not through destruction, but through simple irrelevance. Why did you need politicians and leaders when every human automatically obeyed the Hegemony's directives? The aliens had been remarkably efficient in their takeover. Rather than destroying Earth's infrastructure, they had simply taken control of it. Factories continued to operate, but now they produced goods for the Hegemony. Farms continued to grow food, but the best portions were shipped off-world while humans subsisted on carefully calculated rations. Cities continued to function, but now they were administered by towering alien bureaucrats who viewed humans the way humans might view particularly useful livestock. It was, Elena had to admit, a masterful conquest. No messy genocide, no expensive reconstruction period, no guerrilla warfare to suppress, just quiet, efficient absorption of an entire planet's resources and population, except they had miscalculated. High above the surface of Earth, in the command center of the primary administrative station, High Arbiter Zixithel reviewed the latest efficiency reports with satisfaction. The third-year integration assessment showed remarkable progress. Across all metrics, Zixithel's form was typical of the hegemony's ruling caste, tall, ethereally thin, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Forearms moved with fluid grace as he manipulated holographic displays, each gesture precisely controlled and economical. The hegemony had long ago eliminated inefficiency from both their technology and their biology. The human population continues to exceed productivity expectations, reported Sub-Arbiter Velanath, his secondary arms gesturing to highlight relevant data streams. Agricultural output is up 23% from pre-integration levels. Industrial production has increased by 31%. Infrastructure maintenance efficiency has improved by 45%. Excellent, Zixithel replied, his voice carrying the harmonious tones that marked him as one of the hegemony's chosen administrators, and compliance levels, holding steady at 99.7% across all population centers. The remaining 0.3% show elevated stress indicators, but no organized resistance activity. As predicted, the non-compliant individuals appear to be isolated cases with no significant impact on overall population management. Zixithel nodded approvingly. Earth was turning out to be one of the hegemony's most successful integration projects. The humans were proving to be remarkably efficient workers, once their chaotic individual impulses were properly channeled. Unlike some species, they didn't require extensive biological modification or aggressive conditioning protocols. A simple neural compliance field was sufficient to align their behavior with hegemony objectives. It was almost disappointing how easy it had been. The hegemony had conquered over 10,000 worlds across 4 galaxies, and in Zixithel's experience, newly integrated species typically went through predictable phases of resistance. First came denial, then desperate violence, then bargaining, and finally acceptance. Most species required decades to fully integrate, but humans had skipped straight to acceptance in a matter of weeks. Their supposed warrior culture and indomitable spirit had proven to be nothing more than primitive posturing. When faced with truly superior beings, they had submitted like any other lower species. Increase agricultural quotas by another 5%, Zixithel ordered, and begin preliminary surveys for deep core mineral extraction. The human population density can support more intensive resource extraction without significant population loss, understood, High Arbiter. As Velanath departed to implement the new directives, Zixithel turned his attention to other matters. The hegemony was a vast empire that required constant attention. There were rebellions to suppress in the outer rim, trade disputes to mediate in the core worlds, and always the endless bureaucratic processes that kept 10,000 worlds functioning. In perfect harmony, Earth, thankfully, required minimal oversight. It had become exactly what every conquered world aspired to be, a perfectly efficient component. In the hegemony's grand machine, if Zixithel had been capable of irony, he might have reflected on how wrong that assessment was about to prove. The abandoned subway tunnel beneath Chicago had been Elena's idea. The city's transportation system had been shut down when the hegemony implemented their efficient movement protocols, leaving miles of underground passages that their sensors rarely bothered to monitor. It was the perfect place for activities that the new management wouldn't approve of. Elena made her way through the darkened tunnel, her footsteps echoing softly off the tiled walls. Graffiti from the old world still decorated the surfaces, remnants of a time when humans had the freedom to express dissent, hope, anger, or simple artistic impulse. Now such expressions were classified as inefficient emotional discharge and gently corrected by the compliance fields. The meeting chamber was actually an old maintenance room that Chen had discovered during his assigned work detail. It was shielded from most sensor sweeps by layers of concrete and steel, and Chen had installed additional dampening equipment that would hide their neural signatures from any compliance field monitors. When Ellen arrived, she found that she was the last to join the group. 12 faces turned toward her in the dim light provided by Chen's improvised illumination system. 12 individuals who represented the sum total of organized human resistance on the planet. It wasn't much of an army, but it was a start. Report, Elena said simply, taking her place at the makeshift table that Chen had constructed from salvaged materials. Dr. James Chen stood first, his slight frame and wire-rimmed glasses making him look more like a university professor than a resistance leader, which Elena reflected he had been before the world ended. Now he was the closest thing humanity had to a hope for freedom. The neural analysis is complete. Chen began, his voice carrying the quiet intensity that marked all his work. I've managed to map the complete structure of the hegemony's compliance field network. The good news is that it's even more sophisticated than we initially thought. The bad news is that it's also more vulnerable. He activated a small holographic projector that cast a three-dimensional image of the compliance field matrix above the table. Elena studied the complex web of energy patterns, trying to make sense of the intricate connections. The fields don't just suppress resistance, Chen continued. They actually rewrite neural pathways in real time, constantly adjusting to maintain optimal compliance levels for each individual. It's incredibly elegant, and it explains why the effect is so complete and so persistent. How is that vulnerability? Asked Maria Santos, a former NASA engineer who had been working on countermeasures for the hegemony's technology. Because it's a two-way system, Chen replied, his eyes lighting up with the excitement of discovery. The fields don't just broadcast to human brains, they also receive feedback. They're constantly monitoring neural patterns to adjust their output. And that means we can feed them information, Elena finished, suddenly understanding the implications. If we can figure out how to broadcast the right signals, we can interfere with their control. Better than that, Chen said, his smile becoming almost predatory. If we can decode their control protocols completely, we can reverse them. Instead of making humans compliant to hegemony directives, we can make hegemony forces compliant to human directives. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Elena felt her heart racing with the first real hope she'd experienced since the invasion. How long, she asked, to decode the protocols? Maybe 6 months. If we can get access to a primary control node to build the broadcasting equipment, another 3 months, assuming we can acquire the necessary components without detection, and to implement it globally. Chen's expression grew more serious. That's the challenge. We'd need to coordinate simultaneous activation across every major population center. If we activate in stages, the hegemony will detect the interference and adapt their systems. It has to be all at once or not at all. Elena nodded slowly. 9 months to plan and execute the most ambitious military operation in human history. 9 months to turn the tables on an empire that had ruled the galaxy for over 50,000 years. Then we'd better get started, she said. Hey there, incredible humans. I know we're just getting into the meat of this story, but I have to pause for a second because what you're about to see is going to blow your mind. If you're loving this tale of human ingenuity and defiance, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what you think humanity's secret weapon really is. Trust me, it's about to get so much better. Over the following months, the resistance network grew in ways that even Elena hadn't dared to hope. The key breakthrough came when Chen discovered that the genetic variation responsible for compliance field immunity wasn't actually random. It was linked to specific neural structures that were present in roughly 1 out of every 300 humans. This meant that there were potentially over 25 million humans worldwide who were either immune or potentially immune to hegemony control. The challenge was finding them and awakening those whose immunity was dormant. Elena stood in what had once been the ruins of the Detroit Public Library, now serving as a coordination center for the Midwest Resistance Cell. The irony wasn't lost on her. They were planning humanity's liberation in a building dedicated to the preservation of human knowledge and freedom of thought. Status report from the West Coast Cell, announced Marcus Torres, a former Navy SEAL, who had taken charge of tactical operations. His weathered face bore the scars of the initial invasion, when he had led a desperate defense of the San Diego Naval Base against hegemony enforcement drones. Dr. Okafor's team has successfully synthesized enough anti-compliance serum to treat 5,000 individuals, Marcus continued. They're ready to begin mass distribution as soon as we give the signal. Dr. Aisha Okafor was a biochemist who had discovered that certain compounds could temporarily disrupt the neural pathways that made compliance fields effective. Her work had allowed them to wake up hundreds of potentially immune individuals who had been living under artificial compliance. What about the tech infiltration? Elena asked. Yuki Tanaka looked up from her array of salvaged computers and alien hardware. The former cybersecurity expert had somehow managed to crack the basic encryption protocols used by hegemony communication systems. It had taken her for months of round-the-clock work, but she could now monitor low-level alien communications and even insert false data into their networks. I've identified the primary control nodes for the compliance field network, Yuki reported. There are 17 major installations worldwide, plus the master control system on the orbital station. If we can simultaneously overload all the planetary nodes while Chen uploads his reverse protocol virus to the orbital system, the entire network becomes ours, Elena finished. How long to upload the virus? Assuming I can get physical access to the orbital station's communication array? Maybe 30 minutes. But Elena, getting to that station, leave that to me, Elena said firmly. What matters is that you're ready when the time comes. The plan they had developed was audacious in its scope and terrifying in its complexity. Every resistance cell worldwide would need to act simultaneously, overpowering the local compliance field installations at exactly the moment when Chen's virus was uploaded to the master control system. If even one component failed, the hegemony would detect the attack and adapt their systems to prevent future attempts. They would get one shot. If they failed, humanity would remain enslaved forever. But Elena had spent months studying the patterns of hegemony behavior, and she had identified a crucial weakness. The aliens were so confident in their control systems that they had become complacent. They no longer expected resistance because their technology made resistance seem impossible. That overconfidence would be their downfall. Cell status reports, Elena commanded. One by one, the regional coordinators checked in via encrypted communication links that Yuki had established using hijacked hegemony satellites. The news was better than Elena had dared hope. London Cell, 847 awakened individuals ready for action. Tokyo Cell, 1,203 awakened individuals. Control node infiltration complete. Sao Paulo Cell, 692 awakened individuals. Anti-compliance serums distributed. Sydney Cell, 445 awakened individuals. Diversionary operations prepared. The reports continued, painting a picture of a global network that had grown from 12 desperate individuals to over 15,000 organized resistance fighters. But, even more importantly, they had awakened nearly 50,000 immune or partially immune humans who would be ready to act when the compliance fields were disrupted. When do we move? Asked Chen, his fingers nervously adjusting his glasses. The scientist had spent months perfecting his virus, but Elena could see the weight of responsibility bearing down on him. If his calculations were wrong, if the reverse protocols didn't work as intended. Tomorrow night, Elena decided, during the shift change at 00 hours local time. The hegemony's monitoring systems will be at their lowest efficiency, and we'll have maximum coverage. From the nighttime work schedules, she looked around the room at the faces of her fellow resistance members. These people had given up everything, their safety, their families' safety, their very lives, for the chance to restore human freedom in less than 24 hours. They would either be the liberators of humanity or its final casualties. Any questions? The silence that followed was pregnant with determination. These weren't professional soldiers or trained revolutionaries. They were teachers, engineers, doctors, and workers who had simply refused to accept that freedom was dead. In 18 hours, they would discover whether courage and ingenuity could triumph over technological superiority. Elena was betting everything that they could. High Arbiter Zixithel was reviewing efficiency reports when the first anomaly appeared on his monitoring systems. It was minor, a brief fluctuation in compliance field coherence over the North American continent, but it was unusual enough to warrant attention. Subarbiter Velanath, he called, his harmonic voice carrying easily across the command center. Display the compliance field monitoring data for the past 6 hours. The holographic displays shifted to show the neural compliance network spanning Earth's surface. For the most part, it showed the steady blue glow that indicated normal operation. But there were small red indicators scattered across the globe, areas where the field strength had briefly wavered before returning to normal. Analysis. Zixithel inquired. Most likely equipment aging, Velanath replied after a moment of calculation. The Earth installation has been operating for 3 standard years without major maintenance. Some fluctuation in field coherence is within expected parameters. Zixithel nodded, but something about the pattern bothered him. The fluctuations weren't random. They seemed to be concentrated around specific geographic locations. Population centers that had once been significant during the pre-integration period. Schedule a full diagnostic of the compliance field network, he ordered. I want a complete system analysis with interrotations. Understood, High Arbiter. But even as Velanath departed to implement the diagnostic procedures, Zixithel couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. In his 50 years of service to the hegemony, he had overseen the integration of dozens of worlds. He had learned to trust his instincts about potential problems, even when the data suggested otherwise. The human population had been remarkably compliant for 3 years. Too compliant, perhaps. Other species had required constant monitoring and occasional enforcement actions, even decades after integration. But the humans had seemingly accepted their new status without question. Was it possible that their compliance was less complete than it appeared? Zixithel dismissed the thought almost immediately. The neural compliance fields were one of the hegemony's most advanced technologies, refined through millennia of use across countless worlds. The system was essentially foolproof, with multiple redundancies and adaptive protocols that made resistance virtually impossible. Still, he made a mental note to personally review the diagnostic results when they were completed. It was always better to be cautious when dealing with newly integrated species. If he had known what was about to unfold, he would have evacuated the orbital station immediately. Elena stood on the roof of the abandoned warehouse that served as the Detroit cell's headquarters, looking up at the stars that were barely visible through the glow of the hegemony's atmospheric processors. Somewhere up there, behind the artificial aurora that the alien technology created, was the orbital station that controlled the compliance field network. In 6 hours, she would be up there, infiltrating the most heavily defended installation in the solar system. The plan was insane, but it was their only option. Someone had to be in position to upload Chen's virus at the exact moment the global uprising began. And Elena was the only resistance member, with the military training necessary to penetrate the station's defenses. Second thoughts, asked a voice behind her. Elena turned to see Chen approaching, carrying a small data module that contained the culmination of months of painstaking research. The virus that would either free humanity or doom it to eternal servitude. Always, Elena replied honestly. But that doesn't change what needs to be done. Chen nodded and handed her the data module. It was surprisingly small for something that could alter the fate of an entire species. The upload process is automatic, once you connect it to any access port on the master control system. But Elena, there's something you need to know. What? The virus isn't just going to reverse the compliance fields. If it works the way I've designed it, it's going to give us complete control over the hegemony's technology, their ships, their weapons, their communication systems, everything that's connected to their neural command network. Elena stared at him. You're saying we won't just be breaking free, we'll be taking over. The hegemony's entire technological infrastructure is based on neural interfaces that are similar to the compliance field systems. If we can reverse one, we can reverse them all. Their own confidence in their technology will become their greatest weakness. The implications were staggering. Elena had been thinking in terms of liberation, freeing humanity from alien control, and hopefully forcing the hegemony to leave Earth alone. But Chen was suggesting something far more ambitious. We could turn their own empire against them. She said slowly, "It's possible. The question is, what do we do with that kind of power?" Elena looked back up at the stars, thinking about 3 years of occupation, 3 years of watching her fellow humans reduced to biological robots, 3 years of the hegemony treating Earth like a farm and humanity like livestock. "We teach them what real leadership looks like," she said finally. The infiltration of the orbital station turned out to be easier than Elena had expected, which worried her more than any amount of resistance would have. She had used a maintenance shuttle that Yuki had hacked, uploading false authorization codes that identified her as a routine supply delivery. The station's automated systems had accepted her credentials without question and guided her to a docking bay in the service section. Now she crawled through the station's ventilation system, following Chen's schematics toward the central command center. The alien architecture was elegant but sterile, all flowing curves and soft lighting that seemed designed more for aesthetic appeal than functionality. It reminded her of a museum or an art gallery, beautiful but cold. The hegemony clearly believed in the power of their technology to such an extent that they had built virtually no physical security into their installations. Why would they need guards or barriers when their neural control systems made unauthorized access impossible? Elena reached the junction that would take her to the command center and paused to check her chronometer. 157 hours in 3 minutes. Every resistance cell on Earth would begin their simultaneous attacks on the compliance field installations. She had to time her upload perfectly to coincide with the moment when the planetary network was destabilized. Through the ventilation grate, she could see the command center below. High Arbiter Zixithel stood at the central control console, his forearms moving gracefully as he reviewed data streams. 2 other hegemony officials worked at subsidiary stations, their movements precise and economical. Elena carefully removed the grate and dropped silently into the chamber. The aliens were so absorbed in their work that they didn't notice her presence until she was already at the master control console, connecting Chen's data module to the primary access port. "Security breach," Zixithel announced, his harmonic voice showing the first signs of alarm Elena had ever heard from a hegemony official. "How is this possible?" Elena looked up at the tall alien, meeting his voluminous eyes with a smile that was part triumph and part cold satisfaction. "You wanted to control Earth," she said as Chen's virus began uploading into the station's systems. "Now Earth controls you." The upload completed just as alarms began blaring throughout the station. But it was too late. The virus had already propagated through the hegemony's neural command network, racing across subspace communication links to every installation, every ship, every piece of technology connected to their central systems on the surface of Earth. Compliance field installations overloaded and shut down. As resistance teams overwhelmed their defenses, 50,000 awakened humans emerged from hiding, while millions more began to shake off the artificial lethargy that had controlled them for 3 years. But the real shock came when the hegemony's own forces began receiving new directives, not from their commanders, but from the human resistance network that had suddenly gained access to their command protocols. Zixithel stared at his control displays in horror as his own systems began accepting commands from human sources. "This is impossible," he whispered. "No primitive species could penetrate our neural networks." "That's your problem," Elena replied, watching as hegemony enforcement drones across the planet began turning their weapons on alien installations instead of human targets. "You never bothered to understand what you were dealing with. You thought we were just another species to be cataloged and controlled. But humans don't stay controlled for long." On every inhabited world of the hegemony, communication systems began broadcasting the same message in thousands of languages. "This is Elena Vasquez. of the human liberation movement. The hegemony's reign of control is over. All beings have the right to freedom and self-determination. Surrender your weapons and prepare for new management. The thousand-year empire that had ruled a quarter of the galaxy was collapsing in real time, brought down not by superior force, but by a species they had dismissed as primitive livestock. Elena looked at Zixithal, who was now slumped against his control console in shock. "You're under new management now," she said, "and trust me, we're going to do a much better job than you did." 3 months later, Elena stood in the same command center, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The sterile perfection of hegemony design had been softened by human touches, plants from Earth, artwork created by liberated populations, and the warm lighting that humans preferred over the cold efficiency of alien illumination. Zixithal worked at a subsidiary console, his forearms moving with the same precision as before. But now he was processing requests for humanitarian aid from worlds that had been strip-mined by the hegemony. His neural patterns had been gently adjusted to emphasize empathy and cooperation rather than cold efficiency. It wasn't mind control, Elena told herself. It was rehabilitation. Status report, she requested. Dr. Chen, now serving as director of technological integration, looked up from his workstation. "The last of the hegemony holdout worlds surrendered this morning. That makes it unanimous. All former hegemony territory is now under the administration of the Human Liberation Government. Resistance movements, surprisingly few," Chen replied. "Most of the former subject worlds are actually grateful for the change in management. The hegemony's efficiency came at the cost of individual freedom and cultural identity. Our approach of local autonomy with cooperative oversight is proving much more popular." Elena nodded, still amazed at how completely the tables had turned. The hegemony's own technology had made their downfall inevitable once humans had figured out how to use it. Their neural control systems, designed to ensure absolute obedience, had become the perfect tool for ensuring absolute liberation. "What about the former hegemony leadership? They're adapting," Chen said diplomatically. "The neural modifications we've implemented are helping them develop empathy and understanding for the species they once controlled. Most of them are actually quite capable administrators once their authoritarian programming is removed." Elena walked to the observation window that looked out over Earth. The planet was healing rapidly now that the hegemony's industrial exploitation had been replaced by sustainable development practices. The crystalline spires that had once symbolized alien dominance now served as communication centers, broadcasting messages of freedom and cooperation across the galaxy. "Mum," called Lieutenant Torres from the communication station. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the Outer Rim. It appears that news of our liberation has reached the edge of former hegemony space. Display it." The main screen flickered to life, showing a delegation of beings Elena didn't recognize. Tall, graceful creatures with iridescent skin and multiple sensory organs. "Greetings, humans of Earth," their spokesperson said, their voice carrying harmonics of hope and desperation. "We are the Nexari Commonwealth. We have heard of your success in liberating the galaxy from hegemony control. We wish to request your assistance with a similar problem in our region of space." Elena felt a familiar surge of determination. The hegemony had been just one empire among many, and the galaxy was full of beings who suffered under various forms of oppression. "If humanity had the power to change that, Dr. Chen," she said quietly, "how quickly can we adapt our liberation protocols for use against other neural control systems?" "Give me 6 months," Chen replied, his eyes lighting up with the excitement of a new challenge. "Maybe less if we can get access to examples of their technology." Elena turned back to the screen, where the Nexari delegation waited anxiously for her response. "This is Elena Vasquez, Director of Human Liberation Operations," she said formally. "We'd be happy to discuss how we might assist you. Freedom, after all, is something every sentient being deserves, as the communication channel open to negotiate humanity's next liberation campaign." Elena reflected on how much had changed. The hegemony had sought to control Earth, believing that humans were simple creatures who could be easily managed. Instead, They had awakened something far more dangerous than they could have imagined, a species with an unshakable belief that freedom was worth any sacrifice, and the technological capability to make that belief a reality across the stars. The galaxy would never be the same. And that, Elena thought with satisfaction, was exactly the point. 6 months after the liberation of Earth, the transformation was complete. The former hegemony had become the cooperative Commonwealth of Worlds, with Earth serving as the administrative center for a new form of galactic governance, based on consent rather than control. Elena stood before the Grand Assembly, representatives from over 10,000 worlds who had gathered to ratify the new galactic constitution. The chamber had once been a sterile hall, where hegemony administrators issued directives to their subjects. Now it buzzed with the chaotic energy of genuine democracy as beings from hundreds of species debated the future of their civilization. The motion before us, Elena announced, is the formal adoption of the Universal Rights Declaration, guaranteeing freedom of thought, movement, and self-determination to all sentient beings within Commonwealth space. The vote was unanimous. As the assembly erupted in celebration, a cacophony of cheers, harmonics, telepathic bursts, and other species-specific expressions of joy. Elena looked up at the observation gallery where Zixithal sat with other former hegemony officials. The rehabilitation process had been remarkably successful. Once their authoritarian conditioning had been gently removed, most of the former hegemony leadership had proven to be capable and even compassionate administrators. Zixithal himself now served as Director of Transitional Justice, helping to restore worlds that had been damaged by the old empire's exploitative policies. He met Elena's gaze and nodded, a gesture of respect between former enemies who had become unlikely colleagues. Director Vasquez called out Ambassador Tlara of the Nexari Commonwealth, whose liberation had been humanity's second major success. What are your plans for the sectors beyond our current borders? Elena smiled. Intelligence reports indicated that there were at least 7 other major empires in the galaxy, most of them operating on principles similar to the old hegemony: the dominion of eternal order, the hierarchy of perfect compliance, the federation of absolute truth. All of them were about to discover what humans did to governments that didn't respect the rights of their citizens. We're going to teach them all the same lesson, Elena replied. Control is temporary. Freedom is forever, and humanity has become very good at ensuring that freedom wins. The assembly erupted in cheers once again, and Elena felt the same surge of determination that had driven her through 3 years of resistance and 6 months of liberation campaigns. The hegemony had thought they could control Earth. Instead, Earth was about to control the galaxy, not through force or manipulation, but through the irresistible power of an idea that every sentient being had the right to be free. And as Elena looked out at the representatives of 10,000 liberated worlds, she knew that this was just the beginning. The galaxy was a big place, and there were a lot of beings who still needed to learn what freedom meant. Fortunately, humanity was an excellent teacher. Hey there, incredible humans. What a journey that was, from occupation to liberation to becoming the galaxy's freedom fighters. Humanity once again proved that you should never underestimate the species that refuses to stay down. If this story of ultimate reversal and human determination gave you chills, absolutely smash that like button and tell me in the comments what you think humanity's greatest strength really is. Is it our adaptability, our refusal to accept defeat, our ability to turn our enemies' weapons against them? Or maybe it's something even more fundamental: our unshakable belief that freedom is worth any sacrifice? And here's a mind-blowing question to think about. What if this is exactly how things would play out in real life? What if any species that tried to control humanity would end up being controlled by us instead? Not through force, but through the sheer power of human ingenuity and determination? I've got another incredible story lined up that explores what happens when the galaxy's most advanced AI tries to calculate human behavior and has a complete logical breakdown, trying to understand how we consistently do the impossible. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Click the card here or check out the whole playlist for more stories about why the universe should Be very careful about underestimating humanity. Until next time, remember, we don't just break chains, we turn them into tools for freeing others. Stay free, stay human, and I'll see you in the next one.